Stories that matter. The journey of life from birth to death is an extraordinary trip, sometimes filled with great joy and excitement, but at other times filled with pain, sorrow, and disappointment. Stories That Matter shares both extremes with you. Sometimes our stories will make you feel very happy, but the journey of life is not all happiness. Other times, the journey of life will make you feel sad, for all of us have experienced both extremes. Stories That Matter will begin right after the break with a story that will touch your heart in the journey of life.
Welcome to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with Tina Price. And as we say around here, why, it's Tina time. You've heard that one a few times. Tina's been on the air with us. This will be at least the third show, and maybe more. But the last time we talked to Tina, she was getting ready to go to Uganda. And, you know, for those of us who are in the middle of Kansas to say, well, we're going to go to Uganda. Well, what are you going to do there, Tina? So what were you going to do there? Before you got there, what was the plan?
The plan was we were going over to partner with the local churches in presenting women's conferences, sharing our testimonies, helping to women to see that suffering happens all around and Jesus is the answer.
Okay, and you'd never been to Africa before?
No.
And so I remember from our prior conversation, and you'll be able to check out some of this on the website, but the prior conversation was, yes, I'm going to go. I feel the Lord calling me. Now, if it's truly the Lord's going to raise the money. Mm-hmm. How much money did you need to go?
I needed $3,500 to go.
And how much did you get?
We raised almost $4,300.
And it was very quickly, as I recall.
It was very quickly. Within 2 weeks' time, we had over $4,000 raised.
Okay. So you get on the plane, you head off for Uganda, and that takes about how long before you get off the airport here and wind up in Uganda? Mm-hmm. How much time?
Just shy of 24 hours.
Man, that's a long time.
Yeah, with an 8-hour time difference. So we lost some time because Uganda's 8 hours ahead of us. And yeah, so one flight from JFK in New York all the way to Dubai was 14 hours.
In the air?
In the air. 14 hours in the air, yeah.
Man,
it was a long flight.
So when you get there, what's the first thing that happens, and what do you see in the new land?
Yeah, well, when we first got there, the very first thing that I noticed were the people. People everywhere. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people in America or even in my neighborhood, but we don't see each other so much because we're either in our cars, we're in our workplaces, in our homes, but these people are just out everywhere, walking on the streets. We had to travel 6 hours to get from the airport to the first city that we were going to have the conference in, and there were people everywhere. I mean, you know, like interstate highway, there were 2 lanes of traffic plus a motorcycle that was driving in and out, making its own lane, and people on both sides of the road just walking and carrying baskets on their heads or children on their backs, and just tons of people.
Why so many people out?
Well, I think that's their mode of transportation for most of them is by foot. They have to walk everywhere. They don't have running water in their homes, so somebody might get up one day and just walk 5 miles one way with their 2 jugs to fill it up with water from the well and then walk 5 miles back home. So, or they might be walking into out of their grass hut villages into the little city to pick up a chicken or, you know, some type of food or rice for their home.
So I take it from what you're talking about is every day is just a new search for survival for that day. Mm-hmm. And they probably, unlike what we do here, snacks and 3 meals a day, they have like 1 meal?
They have like 1 meal a day.
And so they spend their day trying to figure out, okay, if I've got to go 10 miles round trip to go get water, that's what I have to do to be able to cook. To do it. That's today's job.
Yeah.
And then to find something to eat for that day, and then the next day's the next worry.
Exactly, yeah.
What were your feelings when you first got out of the airport and started looking at the countryside? What were your feelings?
Well, I think my feelings, first off, were just in awe, you know, to see the beautiful countryside. Now, we weren't in the area where you look off in the distance and see elephants and zebras, you know, gallivanting in the field. We were more inland, the middle of Africa is where Uganda's at. And so, but certainly could see lots of banana trees and mango trees and just, again, the people that were everywhere. And then looking at the homes that are a stark difference from us.
How so?
Well, most of their homes are made out of mud and eucalyptus trees. The eucalyptus tree is it's a very round circumference, and yet it's supposed to be extremely strong, so they use it a lot when they're building. And you would just see these homes that were made with these sticks and mud just packed in, and maybe a tin roof or a grass roof, and people in the yard, women sitting by a wash basin washing their laundry and then wringing it out by hand and hanging it on the tree bushes around them to dry, and children just playing in the dirt there. You know, one day I was driving down a street here or in Abilene, and I saw in one yard several bicycles, a trampoline, a swimming pool, and I thought, I never saw any toys at all in the yards of these children. I just seen them there playing in the dirt, throwing it in the air, chasing each other around, and it just was not like what we're used to seeing.
Man, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter with Tina Price. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Tina Price. And Tina, you made the trip to Uganda. We were just talking in the first segment about the fact you took off for Uganda, you got there, left the airport, and now come to the first city, and on the way out you're really quite amazed by the number of people. The number of people that are just out. They're carrying things on their heads, they're just walking along the roadway, and just people everywhere.
Yeah.
So the idea was the first place you go to a church service.
Right.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that really struck me was I expected to arrive and see lots of desolation and despair, doom and gloom. And I saw that.
From the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that in their physical surroundings, but I didn't see it in the people. When we entered the first church that we were to present at, we were a little bit late, and the worship time was already happening. And we walked in, and it was just high jubilance in there. The women were dancing, and hands were raised in surrender, and they were singing some songs in Uganda, which is their native language, and some songs in English. Like they were singing songs that we know, like I'm trading my sorrows.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord, yes, Lord.
Oh, yeah.
They were singing that in English. And then when the pastor's wife embraced us, she said to each one of us, welcome home. Welcome home. And it really did feel like we were just coming home from a long journey. And so we knew right then that we were in the presence of not only the Lord, but people that were authentically seeking Him. It was awesome to be there. The worship team, they were in full abandonment, just praising God and encouraging the congregation to enter in as well. You know, I was with my team members were mostly comprised of women in their 20s. And so after that first church service, they talked. We had a debriefing time with just the team. And the women all said, you know, everyone was dancing so heartily, but nothing seemed sensual or provocative, or it didn't seem like it was a club, but it was kind of like a club. And I thought, isn't that really how God created us, to be expressive in worship? And that's what we got to experience, was that authentic worship.
I'm flipping through some of your pictures on here, and so if you're looking at me, I'm looking at Tina's phone, and we're going to put as many of these pictures as we can up so that you can kind of see what Tina encountered and the beautiful things that were there.
Yeah.
And so Tina, let me ask you this one then. Clock watchers, does it then begin, okay, hey, this service has been going for 22 minutes.
No.
About time for the pastor to wrap it up.
Not at all.
What
Not
happens?
at all. They just totally go with it. I mean, you know, my kids have oftentimes said to me, Mom, just go with it. That was the expression of go with it, for the epitome of go with it. They do not rush anything. They are very in tune with what's happening in the congregation. And so if they see the people engaged in that worship and that surrender of singing and praising God, they keep singing and praising. And the worship leader will just keep singing the same song over and over. Or, you know, they'll switch to a new song, and people will come from the congregation, and they'll come up front and they'll join the worship team, and they'll sing and they'll dance there.
How cool.
And then, you know, when it finally starts to calm down a little bit, then the pastor will come forward. and he'll pray, and you hear him praying a prayer that comes from the depth of his being, you know, from his very spirit, communing with God himself. And then the word goes forward, and maybe they start singing again. And the most awesome thing is if the singer or the speaker is really touching the hearts of the people, the people will start coming forward, bringing offerings. They'll bring the ladies wear like a wrap around their waist, which is kind of a sign of respect, and they'll bring it and they'll lay it at your feet. Or they'll bring whatever little change. You might see the older widow coming forward, and she has maybe just a small bit of change, and she'll lay it down in front of the speaker or the singer because she's so moved that she wants to bless God's servant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It really was.
You had some. You got to make a trip, take some food into another village. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, we went into a remote village outside of the major city where people still live in grass huts. And there's an orphanage there that the church sponsors. And the church, before we came, we had raised an abundance of funds like we talked about prior. The church pastor went and purchased big bags of flour and rice and beans and bars of soap. And so we broke that down into smaller bags, and we went into the bush, that's what they call it, where those grass huts are, and we began to deliver food to the people that live in there. When we met those people, they would kneel. They would meet us on their knees, greet us on their knees out of respect. And their faces were just in awe. And they just kept saying, Webelo Nenyo, which means thank you very much, thank you very much. And, you know, we told them, we're coming in the name of Jesus, and we bring you gifts because God has given us blessings and gifts to give to you. And they were just amazed. It was amazing to see.
Such a thing is like soap that we just take it for granted. It's everywhere, and you can use it whenever you want and so forth. But over there, they seldom have it. And it is a treasure to them.
It is a treasure. When they were happy when they saw the bags of beans and rice and flour, but then when we handed them this bar of soap, they really got excited, almost to the point of tears, looking around in disbelief like, a soap, I have a soap. And we were talking to some of the locals that could speak their language and English, and they were telling us soap is a luxury in their nation. It's a luxury. And so they were so excited that they were going to be able to wash their bodies with soap, wash their children with soap, wash their clothes with soap. And one man that we met along the path who had followed us, he was an older man, maybe in his 50s, 60s. And I shouldn't say old now that I'm in my 50s, but anyway, and he followed us on a bike. He's just kind of stayed behind, but he followed and he watched. And so finally we turned to him and said, would you like a bar of soap? And he said yes. And then we began to talk to him about Jesus and ask him if he had a relationship with Jesus. And he said no, but he'd like to. So we had the privilege of praying with this man over a bar of soap.
Awesome. We got to take a break. We're going to be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter with Tina Price. Welcome to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Tina Price. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Tina about her trip to Uganda, and we're to this point into the story now where we put a lot of pictures up that you had taken from there. One of the things I noticed, Tina, before we go, some of the heart stories, and obviously the Lord was working through you and to you as you were there, but as I look at the pictures, there's very few men that are among the group. What's going on there?
Yeah. The men are very absent from the home, which is one of the reasons why Man Up and Go goes to Uganda, because they're trying to equip the few men that have made a commitment to their family. They're trying to empower and equip them. So most of the men have deserted the women after they've impregnated them because maybe they weren't happy with her, and so they decide to go on to somewhere else. Or a lot of it has to do with there's such poverty there that the men just do not feel good about themselves because they cannot provide.
Can't provide for them.
So they would rather just run away from the responsibility than face it. Or they've died from disease.
Okay. We're looking at one of the stories that probably up on your screen right now that Glenda's put up there, and What are we looking at? Mama
Yeah,
Jonah, tell me.
We're looking at a woman who is handicapped. When I first went to Uganda, I found myself struck with the thought of searching for handicapped people. You know, I knew that God was sending me to Uganda, but I didn't know exactly why. And then I started looking for handicapped people. And I met this little boy at one of the orphanages that we were at, 11-year-old boy named Jonah. There was something about him. When I looked at him, I wanted to know, what have you seen in your little short 11 years of life that has brought you to this orphanage? Where have you been? What's your story? Well, one of the staff members shared Jonah's story with me. Jonah's mother is handicapped. She has a form of dwarfism, and she lives far, far into the bush.
Is she like 3 foot tall?
Yeah, she's about 3 foot tall, and she lives far from civilization, very primitive out there. And at night, the men would come into her hut, and they would rape her over and over, and she would conceive children. And so the church found out about Mama Jonah, and they visited her, and they were so heartbroken over what was happening to her. They knew she couldn't continue to take care of Jonah, and so they asked her, could they bring Jonah to their orphanage? They would educate him, they would teach him about God, they would give him at least 2 meals a day, and she said yes. She sacrificially let her child go because she wants a better life for him. And so as soon as I heard the story, I knew that's why I'm in Uganda, with my story of abuse and men misusing me multiple times over my life. I knew I was there to meet this woman. And so I asked the pastor's wife, could we visit? And she took me to Mama Jonah. Now, could you just imagine, you're in your normal everyday life, sitting in your hut, wondering, will you eat this day? And a van pulls up with a white people in it. And by the time we got to her, we had a following of about 75 or 100 people. Everywhere we went, they wanted to know, what are the white people doing in our land? And so they circled around us as we sat on these mats outside of the ground. And I looked at her and I said, my name is Tina. And I came to Uganda because I prayed and God told me to come here. I didn't know why until I met your son, Jonah. And then I shared with her that I heard her sad story, and I wanted to come and tell her that God loves her and that she's never been alone. In all of the abuse that she's endured, God has been with her, and that she's very valuable to him. So much so that he would send a woman from America to tell her this good news. And I had the opportunity to share my story of childhood abuse with her, and how Christ entered that place in my life and has healed me and has blessed me and my offspring. And so now I shared the gospel with her. She said that she did know Jesus, but you know, I don't know that she has a personal relationship with her. We gave her food, and I bought her this beautiful cloth that I wanted, one of those cloths I talked about that they wrap around their waist. I wanted her to have that so she will always remember that God loves her that much.
Wow.
It was powerful. And I knew then, mission accomplished. That's why I came, and what a privilege to be a part of that.
Well, absolutely. And tell me about Jonah.
So Jonah is 11 years old, and he's at the orphanage. The beautiful thing about the orphanage is every Christmas Jonah gets to go home to his mother, because the pastor and his wife believe in the family unit so strongly. They want their children that are orphans to know you do have family. And this is what it's been like. And they're teaching them the foundation in God's word. When we showed up at this orphanage, Doug, the children greeted us with a song, and their song said, God is in control. They sang it to us in English. God is in control. We will choose to remember we've never been forsaken. God is in control. Orphans, this is what they're learning. Faith and power to break those generational cycles of abuse and dysfunction in their homes. And so the pastors send the children home to be that light in their own village and to keep those connections. It's awesome what they're doing.
How does Mama Jonah get by? How does she live? Because she's, you know, she's out obviously with no protection, being used and abused.
Well, the nice thing is, the beautiful thing is that the church went out with another organization and they built her a concrete home now. So now she's in the bush with a concrete home and a steel door that locks every night. So that's no longer happening to her. The abuse is not happening.
Poor thing.
And now she's able to be safe in her own home. And I just know that she will look at that cloth and that God is doing a deep work in her. We left her a Bible in her own language, and I believe He's healing her right now.
Well, I would not be surprised at all that she would perceive that for God to send somebody from the United States, a woman from the United States, to come over and share that with her, give her that cloth for those things that are going on around her. She would have to feel like the Lord never forgot her.
Exactly.
You know, it's like like this says, "In God we trust."
Absolutely.
And wow, that's a powerful story.
The beautiful thing was, and I'll give the video, hopefully we'll get to show it, but I have a video of her son Jonah before I went to visit her, and it's the most beautiful, brilliant smile of this little boy singing, "Hello, my name is Jonah."
Wow, how cool.
And she watched that video, and that's the first time I saw her smile. The whole time we were there, she was more in disbelief and caution, reserved.
Yeah.
But when I showed her that video, she just lit up.
Awesome. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter with Tina Price. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Tina Price. If you haven't been watching the first part of this, you've missed an awfully good program, so I hope you can catch it on its rebroadcast. But Tina and I are talking about her trip to Uganda. We just finished one of the heart moments when talking about Mama Jonah and Jonah, and I guess I've never been to Africa, and so I suppose my times in overseas is different things. But in this case here, how do these? I mean, you're there to help the people in some way. You minister to them. But somehow they got to make a living. How does that occur, that they have any money coming in to be able to even get by that day? What happens?
Well, the one thing that really just impressed me so much are the 3 pastors that we worked with of 3 different city churches. And those pastors are locals, they're Ugandans, and so they are pouring into their people and asking God for a change in their culture. And they have committed to educating children so that they have an education, they can go off to university and get a degree and higher jobs. They have committed to providing food for these children, and they have committed to helping the women in that area learn a vocation, such as in one of the poorest areas in Jinja, Uganda, is called Masese. They go there. There are hundreds of single moms that live there with 5 and 6 kids, and the pastor's wife has gone in there and helped them learn how to make these paper beaded necklaces. So they have like 1/8 of an inch strips of paper of magazines, and then they have this little thing that looks like a toothpick skewer or something, and they just sit there and they roll that newspaper on there until it forms the shape of a bead, and then they dip it in some kind of lacquer, and then they thread it onto an elastic string to make a necklace.
What you're wearing now.
Yeah, what I'm wearing now, to make a necklace. And then the pastor's wife helps them sell them in the local market, and with the connections that they have with the Americans, we're able to put them on like American Etsy shops, online business shops. And so like Man Up and Go has a area where you can buy these necklaces. They're also teaching the women how to sew. So they make, for the sugar bags, the sugar comes in these big sacks. The women get material, they quilt the inside of it, and they make these beautiful handles for the bag, and then they're able to sell them for others to go shopping in the market. They have taught the women how to do tree farm. They're also teaching the men how to do the tree farm, and then they're teaching them how to cultivate the ground, still using oxen and a plow, and plant crops.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they are teaching them to be self-sufficient, of course, to be able to provide their own means. They actually said to us, we don't really want the Americans to just come in and do everything, but teach us how to fish. And so we are.
That's an awesome story. Hope you've enjoyed Stories That Matter with Tina Price. It's a good show. Tina, thank you so much. Thank you so much for going to Uganda and carrying the message over, being God's hand over there. Awesome job. Way to go.
Thank you.
Hope you've enjoyed. See you next time on With Stories That Matter.